The stars looked different from the observation deck of Orbital Station New Horizon. Captain Susan Miller stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching Earth rotate slowly below. Today was the day humanity would officially meet their first alien visitors. "Nervous, Captain?" asked a deep voice behind her. Susan turned to see Staff Sergeant Jack Davis, the station's head of security. His face was weathered from years under harsh suns during the Indonesian resource wars. A scar ran along his jawline, a reminder of the conflict that had claimed so many lives. "Not nervous," Susan replied. "Just aware of how important this is. The Valorians could change everything for us." Jack nodded but didn't smile. "That's what worries me." The Valorian ship had appeared in Earth orbit 3 weeks ago. After initial contact, they had requested formal diplomatic relations. According to their messages, they represented the Valorian Collective, a federation of 7 spacefaring species that had been watching Earth for decades. "They're here," said Communications Officer Lisa Green over the station's speakers. "Valorian shuttle approaching Docking Bay 3. Susan straightened her uniform. "Sergeant Davis, gather your team and meet me at the docking bay." "Yes, ma'am." The walk to the docking bay felt longer than usual. Station crew members stopped to watch as Susan and Jack passed by. Everyone knew what was happening today. First contact, the real thing. When they arrived, Jack positioned his security team carefully around the bay. They wore dress uniforms but kept sidearms holstered at their hips. Susan had insisted on this despite the Valorians' request for no weapons. Some precautions were just common sense. "Opening outer doors," announced the docking control officer. "Valorian shuttle secured. Equalizing pressure." Susan took a deep breath. "Here we go," she whispered. The inner doors slid open with a hiss. Standing in the doorway was a being unlike anything Susan had ever seen outside of digital simulations. The alien stood nearly 7 feet tall with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer slightly in the station's lights. It had 4 arms and large, dark eyes that took up much of its face. Behind it stood 4 more aliens of different shapes and sizes. High Emissary Zex Toril of the Valorian Collective. The translator on Susan's wrist announced as the alien spoke, in a series of musical tones. "I bring greetings from the 7 worlds to humanity." Susan stepped forward. "Captain Susan Miller of the United Earth Defense Force, on behalf of all humans, welcome to New Horizon." The alien made a gesture with its upper right hand that the translator identified as a sign of respect. "We have observed your world with great interest, Captain Miller. Your species has progressed remarkably fast given your young age." Jack shifted, his weight slightly. Susan noticed his hand had drifted closer to his sidearm. "We're honored by your interest in Earth," Susan replied diplomatically. "We have much to learn from your collective." "Yes," agreed Zex Toril. "You are still in your cultural infancy, but you show promise. That is why we have come." The tour of the station went smoothly. The Valorians seemed particularly interested in Earth's history, asking many questions about human development and society. They were especially fascinated by Jack's military background. "Your species still engages in organized conflict?" asked Zex Toril while examining a display about the formation of the United Earth Defense Force. "Not as much as we used to," Susan explained. "The Defense Force exists mainly for protection now." "Protection from what?" asked another Valorian, this one smaller with green-tinted skin. "From the unknown," Jack answered simply. "From threats? We haven't met yet." The Valorians exchanged looks that Susan couldn't interpret. "How charmingly primitive," Zex Toril said. "The collective outgrew the need for military forces thousands of years ago." Later that evening, Susan hosted a formal dinner in the station's main conference room, which had been decorated with symbols of Earth's nations. The Valorians ate very little but seemed to enjoy watching the humans dine. "Captain Miller," said Zex Toril as the meal ended, "we have reviewed your species and found you acceptable for preliminary association with the collective." Susan smiled politely. "That's wonderful news. What would this association involve?" "We would establish permanent outposts on your world," explained Zex Toril. "We would share some technologies and guide your development. Eventually, humans would be integrated into our societal hierarchy as a protected class." Jack's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Protected class? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Yes, nodded Zextoral enthusiastically. Many younger species benefit from our guidance. We would ensure your development follows the correct path. We would help your governments make proper decisions. We would correct your historical mistakes. Susan kept her diplomatic smile fixed firmly in place, but she felt a chill run through her. That's a very generous offer, emissary. We would need to discuss this with our world leaders, of course. Of course, agreed Zextoral, though I should mention that all species eventually accept our guidance. It is inevitable. Your world has such potential, but you are so young, so in need of direction. Jack placed his fork down carefully. His jaw had tightened visibly, but he remained silent. We have prepared quarters for you and your delegation, Susan said, changing the subject. Tomorrow we can begin formal discussions about cultural exchange. As the Valorians were escorted to their quarters, Jack lingered behind with Susan. They think we're children, he said quietly. Susan nodded. They're arrogant, but they have technology we need. We should at least hear them out. They're talking about taking over, Captain. They just used nicer words than invasion. I know, Susan sighed. But what choice do we have? Their ships could probably wipe us out if they wanted to. Jack's eyes narrowed. Maybe. But I don't think they understand us at all. They've been watching Earth, but they haven't been seeing us. Out in space, more Valorian ships appeared silently in Earth orbit. The night sky now held more than just human satellites and stars. Change had arrived, whether humanity was ready or not. 3 months passed quickly. The Valorian ships became a common sight in Earth's orbit. Most humans welcomed the aliens with excitement and hope. News channels showed Valorian representatives meeting with world leaders. They promised medical advances, clean energy, and solutions to climate change. What they didn't mention was the price. Sergeant Jack Davis noticed the changes happening slowly. First, the Valorians requested observation rights at all military bases. Then they suggested improvements to Earth's defense systems that required Valorian operators. Soon they were offering to replace human security forces with their own at key locations for efficiency. Today, Jack stood on the massive Valorian command ship alongside Captain Susan Miller and a small team of human diplomats and military observers. They had been invited to tour the ship as part of the cultural exchange program. This vessel has been our home for 2 centuries, explained Ambassador Zexitoral as they walked through corridors twice as tall as a human. It serves as both diplomatic center and historical archive. Jack paid close attention to everything. He counted weapon emplacements, noted security checkpoints, and watched how the various alien species interacted. The Valorians were clearly in charge, with other species serving in lesser roles. What species is that? Jack asked, pointing to a small, bird-like alien that scurried away when they approached. Ah, the Kelthari, said Zextoral with a gesture the translator called reminiscent affection. They joined our collective 200 years ago. They maintain our environmental systems, very skilled with atmospheric regulation. Susan smiled, politely. They seemed afraid of us. The Kelthari are naturally timid, Zextoral explained. Before we found them, they were constantly at war over resources. We helped them overcome their primitive instincts. The tour continued to the historical archives. Here the walls displayed moving images of Valorian history. Jack noticed Susan's attention was focused on the technological displays, but he was drawn to something else. The history of Valorian peaceful integration of other species. I'd like to learn more about the Kelthari, Jack said casually. How did they join the collective? Zexitoral activated a display. The Kelthari were at Civilization Stage 3 when we found them, capable of limited space travel but still trapped in cycles of violence. We shared our technology and guidance. Agree. Display showed images of Kelthari cities being rebuilt with Valorian architecture. Jack noticed something the ambassador didn't explain. Images of Kelthari being loaded onto transport ships. What happened here? Jack asked, pointing to the transports. Some Kelthari suffered from evolutionary regression, Zexitoral said. They rejected our help and became violent. We relocated them to specialized labor colonies where they could contribute without disrupting progress. Jack felt his stomach tighten. And their military, their government. Both were primitive systems that we helped them outgrow, Zexteral said proudly. We established advisory councils to guide their decisions until they were ready for full integration. Now they are productive members of the collective, free from their violent past. Jack looked closer at the images. The advisory councils showed Valorians seated at the center, with a few Kelthari in lesser positions around them. Jack had seen similar arrangements in Earth's colonial history. How many species have you integrated this way? Jack asked. 23. So far, Zexteral answered. Each one now enjoys the benefits of collective membership. As the tour continued, Jack fell back beside Laura Kim, a UN diplomat who had been taking notes. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? He whispered. She nodded, slightly. They're colonizers with better PR. They're doing the same thing to Earth, Jack said. The observation posts, the technology sharing that requires their operators, the gradual replacement of our military command structure. What can we do? Laura asked. They're centuries ahead of us technologically. Jack looked around at the massive ship. I need to see more of their records. Later, Jack managed to separate from the main group by claiming interest in Valorian art. A young Valorian guide named Nevlaran seemed eager to impress the humans with their cultural achievements. These records, Jack said, gesturing to a terminal. Do they contain information about all species in the collective? Of course, Nevlaran said proudly. The complete history is our greatest achievement. It contains the true account of every species' path to enlightenment. Jack pointed to a familiar symbol. This is Earth's section? Yes. We've been documenting your species for several of your centuries, Nevlaran explained. Would you like to see? The screen showed detailed observations of Earth's development. Jack was disturbed by how thorough it was. The Valorians had been watching for longer than they had admitted, but what really caught his attention was a section labeled Integration Timeline. According to the Valorian plan, Earth would be fully integrated within 50 years. Human militaries would be disbanded within 10. Advisory councils would replace governments within 20. Resource control would transfer to collective management immediately. Fascinating, Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. And what happens to humans who don't want this integration? Nevlaran looked confused. Why would any species reject improvement? But if some individuals suffer from evolutionary regression, they would be relocated for specialized rehabilitation. It's quite humane. When the tour group reconvened for a formal meeting, Jack could barely contain his anger. Ambassador Zexteral was explaining the next phase of cultural exchange. Valorian advisors would begin working directly with Earth's military leadership. Ambassador, Jack interrupted, I've been studying your historical archives. I'd like to ask about the Kelthari who were relocated. Zexteral seemed surprised. An unusual interest, but I'm happy to explain. Some Kelthari couldn't adapt to peaceful existence. They became dangerous to themselves and others. So you imprisoned them, Jack said flatly. No, Zexteral laughed. We helped them. The labor colonies provided structure and purpose. And the Kelthari government? You replaced it with your own people. The ambassador's four hands made a dismissive gesture. Their governmental systems were inefficient. Our advisors simply guided them toward better methods. Susan shot Jack a warning look, but he continued. And you're planning the same for Earth. Disband our militaries, replace our governments with your advisors, and relocate anyone who objects. The room fell silent. Zexteral looked genuinely confused. Of course. It's the path all species must follow to achieve true civilization. Why does this disturb you? We're offering you the greatest gift, freedom from your violent nature. Jack stood up slowly. What you've done, he said quietly. Where I come from, we have names for these things. Names? The ambassador asked, tilting his large head. War, crimes, Jack replied. Subjugation, forced relocation, cultural genocide. The Valorian delegation looked puzzled. Their translators seemed to struggle with the concepts. But there was no war, Zextoril explained patiently, as if to a child. And we improved their worlds. Jack's eyes narrowed. That's not for you to decide. The Valorians exchanged looks of genuine confusion. To them, their actions were benevolent. The very idea that species might prefer freedom over Valorian guidance seemed incomprehensible, and that, Jack realized, was what made them so dangerous. Word spread quickly through the Valorian ship about the strange human concept of war crimes. The very idea that warfare could have rules seemed to fascinate the aliens. Their historical records showed that before their enlightenment, warfare meant total victory by any means necessary. Jack found himself suddenly popular among the Valorian scientists. The morning after his confrontation with Ambassador Zextoril, he was invited to speak with a group of Valorian researchers. Captain Susan Miller advised caution. "They're trying to understand us better," she said as they walked to the meeting room. "That could be good or bad. They need to understand we're not like the other species they've conquered," Jack replied. "Integrated," Susan corrected with a small smile. "And try not to start an interstellar incident today." The meeting room was filled with Valorian scientists and a few representatives from other species in the collective. Jack recognized the bird-like Kelthari standing nervously in the corner. A large display screen dominated one wall. "Sergeant Davis," greeted the lead scientist, Tez Morin. "We are most curious about your statement regarding war crimes. Our translator systems struggle with these concepts." Jack looked around the room. "You've been watching Earth for centuries, but you still don't understand humans, do you?" The Valorians exchanged glances. "We understand your biological and technological development," Tez Morin said. "Your cultural evolution is more complex." "I'll say," Jack replied. "What do you want to know?" "You mentioned rules for warfare," another scientist said. "This seems contradictory. Why limit methods of achieving victory?" Jack rubbed his chin. "Because without limits, we destroy what we're fighting for." The Valorians looked confused. Jack sighed and pointed to the display. "Can you show Earth's history? World War II." The screen changed to show images of the global conflict. Jack walked closer. "Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years," he explained. "But as our weapons got more powerful, we realized we needed rules, or we'd destroy ourselves." He pointed to images of bombed cities. In World War II, civilians became targets. Cities were destroyed. Later, we developed atomic weapons that could wipe out entire populations. The Valorians watched with interest as the screen showed the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. "After each major war, we created more rules," Jack continued. "The Geneva Conventions, the Hague Regulations, the Martian Accords from our early space settlements. We prohibited certain weapons. We established rules for treating prisoners. We agreed that civilians should be protected." "Why?" asked a small Valorian. "If your goal is victory, why limit your tactical options?" Jack thought about the question. "Because we recognized our own capacity for horror. Without rules, we become monsters. And because despite what you might think, humans fight better when we believe we're fighting for something right." The discussion continued for hours. Jack explained the concepts of proportional response, banned weapons, treatment of prisoners, protection of civilians. The Valorians asked detailed questions, clearly struggling to understand. "In the Indonesian resource wars," Jack said, pointing to images of the conflict where he had served, "both sides violated these rules at times. It made the fighting worse, not better. Trust was destroyed. Hatred grew deeper. Reconciliation became almost impossible." "How do you enforce these rules?" asked Tez Morin. "International courts. Public pressure. Sometimes military intervention against the worst offenders." "And these work?" Jack smiled grimly. "Not always. But they give us something to strive for. They remind us of our better nature when we're at our worst." Unknown to Jack, security feeds were transmitting the conversation throughout the ship. In their quarters, Captain Miller and her diplomatic team watched with increasing concern. "He's essentially giving them a warning," said Laura Kim, "telling them what lines not to cross, or giving them a blueprint for how to control us," countered another diplomat. Susan watched the screen thoughtfully. "Maybe both." Back in the meeting room, a Valorian scientist asked about humanity's military capabilities compared to other species. "You seem concerned about your ability to resist us," the scientist said bluntly. "Is that why you created these rules? Because you fear defeat?" Jack laughed. "No. If anything, these rules exist because we got too good at war." The Valorians looked puzzled. Jack stood up and walked around the room. "Humanity has spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare," he explained, "and the last few hundred trying to draw lines around what's acceptable even when fighting for survival. Cross those lines, and humans don't just fight, they unite." He stopped in front of the Valorian leader. "You think you're so advanced because you outgrew warfare, but you never really understood it in the first place." "Explain," demanded Tesmoran. "Your records show your pre-Enlightenment wars were about total domination, win at any cost. But human warfare evolved differently. We learned to fight for limited objectives. We learned to make peace with enemies. We even learned to lose wars and come back stronger." Jack pointed to the other species in the room. "You've never had to really fight for your survival against a technologically superior force, have you? Never had to wage a guerrilla war or resistance movement or insurgency." The Valorians seemed uncomfortable now. Jack continued, his voice steady. "Humans have been on both sides of that equation. We know how to fight when outmatched. We know how to win even when we can't win conventionally. It's in our history, our literature, our very DNA." The meeting ended abruptly when Ambassador Zex Toril entered the room. The ambassador glanced at the display showing Earth's military history, then at Jack. "I hope this cultural exchange has been informative," Zex Toril said coolly. "Very," Jack replied. "I think we understand each other better now." As Jack left, a young Kelthari approached him in the corridor. The bird-like alien looked around, nervously. "Is it true?" the Kelthari whispered. "Do your people really have laws protecting the defeated?" Jack nodded. "Yes. Why?" The Kelthari's feathers ruffled. "The histories they showed you are not complete. Before the Valorians came, my people had a great civilization. We were not just warmongers as they claim." "I figured as much," Jack said quietly. "My name is Kree-La," the alien continued. "My parents told me stories of the resistance. Most were taken to the labor colonies. Few remember now." Jack looked around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because your talk of war crimes gave me hope," Kree-La said. "The Valorians fear you humans. You are different from the others they have integrated." Before Jack could respond, a group of Valorian security officers approached. Kree-La quickly bowed his head and scurried away. "Sergeant Davis," the lead officer said, "Ambassador Zex Toril requests your presence for an important announcement." Jack had a feeling things were about to change. "Lead the way," he said. Jack was escorted to the command center of the Valorian ship. The large circular room buzzed with activity. Screens showed star maps and what looked like military movements. Captain Susan Miller and the rest of the human delegation were already there, their faces tense. Ambassador Zex Toril stood with several high-ranking Valorians. Their body language was different now, stiffer, more formal. "Sergeant Davis," the ambassador said, "your discussion with our scientists was most informative." Jack glanced at Susan, who gave him a small nod. "Happy to share," he replied carefully. The main screen changed to show Earth. Jack saw with alarm that Valorian ships had taken up new positions around the planet. They were stationed near major military bases and defense installations. "What's going on?" Susan asked, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. High Commander Vox Lathar, the military leader of the Valorian fleet, stepped forward. "We are implementing standard safety protocols." "Safety protocols?" Susan echoed. "Yes. After reviewing Sergeant Davis's presentation on human warfare, we have reassessed the integration timeline for Earth. Jack felt his stomach tighten. Meaning what exactly? The commander's forehands moved in a complex pattern. Your species has a concerning fixation with conflict. Your rules of warfare suggest an advanced understanding of violence rather than a rejection of it. We call it learning from our mistakes, Jack said. Perhaps, the commander replied, but our analysis now suggests that humans require a more structured approach to integration. The screen changed to show Valorian ships deploying smaller vessels toward Earth's surface. These are observer units, explained Ambassador Zex Toril. They will establish monitoring stations at your military installations. That's an invasion, Jack said bluntly. The ambassador looked genuinely surprised. No, this is protection, for both our peoples. Your military capabilities, while primitive compared to ours, could cause significant harm if misdirected. Susan stepped forward. Ambassador, our governments have not agreed to this. You need to recall those ships immediately. I'm afraid that isn't possible, the ambassador replied. The High Council has determined this is the safest path forward. Your leaders are being informed as we speak. On Earth, panic was spreading. News channels showed Valorian ships hovering over military bases around the world. The United Nations Security Council had convened an emergency session. Admiral William Reeves, head of the United Earth Defense Force, addressed the grim-faced council members. The Valorians have positioned weapons platforms in orbit, he reported. Their ships are landing at our major military installations. They claim this is for observation only, but our scans show weapon systems being deployed. Can we stop them? Asked the representative from Brazil. Admiral Reeves shook his head. Not with conventional means. Their technology is centuries beyond ours. So we surrender? Asked the Russian delegate angrily. No, Reeves replied firmly. We prepare. The Valorians don't understand human warfare. They don't understand our capacity for resistance, for asymmetric conflict. The council room was silent as Reeves continued. We've lost contact with Captain Miller's team on the Valorian ship. We must assume they're being detained. Back on the Valorian command ship, the human delegation was indeed being escorted to new quarters. For your safety during this period of reassessment, Ambassador Zex Toril explained smoothly. Jack noticed that the new area was sealed off from the rest of the ship. The doors had guards posted outside. This looks like a detention center, he noted. A temporary precaution, the ambassador assured them. Once the installation of observer units is complete, normal cultural exchange can resume. After the Valorians left, Susan gathered the delegation close. They're scared, she said quietly. They should be, Jack replied. Laura Kim, the UN diplomat, looked worried. But they're so much more advanced than us. Their ships could destroy our major cities in minutes. True, Jack agreed. But destruction isn't the same as control. They want Earth intact with humans as obedient members of their collective. That means ground forces, occupation, pacification. Things humans have centuries of experience fighting against, Susan finished. Jack nodded. Exactly. And they've never faced real resistance before. The Kelthari and others gave in because they didn't know how to fight back effectively. We need to contact Earth, Susan said. Jack pulled a small device from his boot. Standard marine equipment. Short-range communicator. It might reach their systems if we can access a terminal. When a Valorian guard brought food, Jack asked to speak with Krila, the Kelthari he had met earlier. The maintenance worker, he explained. Our environmental controls aren't working properly. The guard hesitated, then nodded. An hour later, Krila arrived, nervous but eager to help. The Valorians are implementing full integration protocols, the bird-like alien whispered as he pretended to check the room's systems. They only do this when they fear resistance. Can you help us access their communication systems? Susan asked. Krila's feathers ruffled in what might have been a smile. My people maintain the ship's systems. We know ways around their security that they've forgotten. With Kreelaw's help, Jack connected his device to a hidden access point. The message was brief. Valorians implementing forced integration. Detention of delegation confirms hostile intent. Recommend Operation Thermopylae. On Earth, Admiral Reeves received the message. He immediately called the Security Council back into session. We have confirmation, he announced. The Valorians intend to subjugate Earth, not partner with us. They've detained our delegation and are positioning forces for a full military occupation. What options do we have? Asked the Secretary General. Reeves brought up a tactical display. We can't match their technology, but we can make Earth too costly to occupy. I recommend implementing Operation Thermopylae immediately. The scorched Earth contingency? Asked the French representative with alarm. That's extreme. Not scorched Earth, Reeves corrected. Strategic resistance. We disperse our forces, hide key resources, and prepare for prolonged asymmetric warfare. We make occupying Earth a nightmare. The Council debated briefly, then voted. Operation Thermopylae was approved. Around the world, military units began to move. Weapons and supplies were dispersed to hidden locations, command structures decentralized, civilian leaders prepared for resistance. Back on the Valorian ship, Jack sensed the change before he saw it. Alarms began to sound. Valorian soldiers rushed through the corridors. What's happening? Susan asked Kreelaw, who had returned with the pretense of finishing repairs. The humans are not surrendering, the Kelthari said, with what sounded like admiration. They're dispersing, hiding. The Valorians can't track them all. A screen in their room activated. Ambassador Zexatoral's face appeared, no longer serene but concerned. Captain Miller, your people are behaving irrationally, the ambassador said. They're refusing our observer units and preparing for conflict. Please help them understand the futility of resistance. Susan stepped forward. Ambassador, you've made a serious miscalculation. Humans don't surrender just because the odds are against us. But you cannot win, the ambassador insisted. Jack joined Susan in front of the screen. Winning and not losing aren't always the same thing, he said. The ambassador looked confused. We will be forced to demonstrate our power if this resistance continues. And then what? Jack asked. Kill us all? That's not integration. That's extinction. And if that's your plan, you should know. Humans fight hardest when our backs are against the wall. The screen went dark. Jack turned to the others, his face grim but determined. Now we wait, he said, and see if they're willing to become the monsters they claim to have evolved beyond. 3 days passed. The human delegation remained confined to their quarters on the Valorian ship. They received regular meals and were treated well, but they were prisoners nonetheless. Jack spent his time studying the Valorian ship through the limited viewports in their quarters. He noted patrol patterns, watched shift changes, and listened carefully to the sounds of the ship. Susan coordinated with the other delegates, preparing for whatever might come next. On the morning of the 4th day, Valorian guards arrived. Captain Miller and Sergeant Davis, the lead guard announced. You will come with us. Where to? Susan asked. The High Council has arrived. They wish to speak with you. Susan and Jack exchanged looks. Just us? Jack asked. Yes. The others will remain here. They were escorted through parts of the ship Jack hadn't seen before. The corridors were wider, the ceilings higher, the decorations more elaborate. Finally, they arrived at a massive doorway guarded by Valorians in ceremonial armor. The doors opened to reveal a circular chamber. In the center sat 9 Valorians on elevated seats. Behind them stood representatives of other species from the collective, including several Kelthari, Captain Susan Miller, Sergeant Jack Davis. Step forward, commanded a voice. Jack noticed that Susan stood straighter, her military bearing on full display. He did the same, shoulders back, chin up. The central figure of the High Council was taller than other Valorians, with skin that had a golden tint. I am High Elder Vex Karan, Supreme Leader of the Valorian Collective, he announced. We have traveled far to address the situation with your species. Jack was surprised. The head of the entire collective had come personally. This was bigger than he had thought. We're honored by your presence, Susan replied formally. "We hope you've come to order the withdrawal of your forces from Earth." The High Elder made a gesture that their translators didn't recognize. "We have reviewed your species' history extensively. We find it troubling." "Troubling how?" Jack asked. "Your Sergeant Davis spoke of rules for warfare, concepts our species abandoned millennia ago. We believed this made us more evolved, yet you persist despite your history of violence. Or perhaps because of the lessons learned from it." The High Elder gestured, and a holographic display activated in the center of the room. It showed Earth in perfect detail. Red dots, highlighted, military installations, naval fleets, air bases, missile silos. Every submarine, aircraft carrier, and defense platform was marked. "You are outmatched in every measurable way," Elder Vex Koran stated. "Yet your people prepare to fight rather than submit. Our models predicted immediate capitulation once our superior capabilities were demonstrated." Jack looked at the display with a sinking feeling. The Valorians had complete information about Earth's military forces. There were no secrets, no hidden advantages. "You misunderstand humanity fundamentally," Jack said. "We don't fight because we think we'll win. We fight because some things are worth fighting for, even when victory seems impossible," Susan added. "Your species may have evolved beyond warfare, Elder, but in doing so you've forgotten something crucial: the difference between peace and subjugation. We haven't." The chamber was silent for a moment. "We have ruled the stars for 12,000 years, the High Elder said finally. "We have integrated 23 species into our collective for their own betterment. None have resisted once our intentions were made clear." "None of them were human," Jack replied simply. The High Elder studied them. "No, they were not. Qadir." Holographic display changed, showing Valorian ships around Earth. Jack noticed with surprise that they were pulling back, moving away from their positions near military installations. "What's happening?" Susan asked. "We are withdrawing our forces from Earth orbit," the High Elder announced. Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Why?" The Elder's four hands made a complex gesture. "In 12,000 years of expansion, we have never encountered a species that voluntarily limited their capacity for violence while maintaining the will to fight when necessary." The Elder stood and descended from his elevated position. Walking closer to Jack and Susan, he continued, "Your species created rules for warfare, limits on your own capacity for violence, not from weakness but from wisdom. You recognized destructive potential within yourselves and chose restraint." Susan glanced at Jack, her expression cautious but hopeful. "What does this mean for Earth?" "The Valorian Collective withdraws its integration plan," the High Elder declared. "Instead, we offer an alliance between equals, technology exchange, open borders, cultural sharing. No subordination." Jack was suspicious. "Why the sudden change?" The Elder looked at Jack with what seemed like respect. "Because in your explanation of war crimes, Sergeant Davis, you revealed something we had forgotten. True civilization is not the absence of conflict. It is finding the wisdom to establish boundaries even in humanity's darkest hours." Later, as the human delegation prepared to return to Earth, Ambassador Zexitoral approached Jack privately. "We watched your historical archives," the ambassador admitted. "Your world wars, your Cold War, the resource wars. We studied your resistance movements, your guerrilla campaigns, your revolutions." Jack nodded. "And we came to guide a primitive species but instead found something unexpected. A species that has faced its own darkness and chose to create light from it." The ambassador's four hands made a gesture of respect. "The High Council believes that humans have much to teach us about the true meaning of civilization. The rules you created for warfare, they speak to a depth of wisdom we had lost." Jack thought about this for a moment. "We're not inherently good or bad," he said finally. "We're just very, very good at learning from our mistakes." Eventually, when the human delegation returned to Earth, they brought news of the new alliance. The Valorian withdrawal was already visible in the night sky as their massive ships moved away from Earth orbit. In the United Nations General Assembly, Captain Susan Miller presented the terms of the alliance. The Valorian Collective has recognized Earth as an equal partner, she announced to thunderous applause. Humanity will join the stars not as a protected species, but as full members of the galactic community. In the back of the chamber, Jack Davis stood quietly. A Kelthari representative named Kreela stood beside him. My people have requested human advisors, Kreela said softly, to help us rebuild what we lost under Valorian integration. Jack smiled. I'm sure we can help with that. You have changed the collective, Kreela continued. Already, other species speak of self-determination, of equal standing. That's how alliances should work, Jack replied. Everyone brings something to the table. And what did humans bring that changed the Valorians' minds? Jack thought about it. Perspective, I guess. The recognition that being civilized isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about how you handle it when it comes. Throughout the galaxy, word spread of the curious species called humans. Technologically young but possessing a unique understanding of both warfare and peace that even the mighty Valorians had come to respect. The line between civilization and barbarism, it seemed, was not as clear as the Valorians had once believed. And in the years to come, the human concept of war crimes would become a cornerstone of a new galactic code, one that recognized that true peace comes not from the absence of conflict, but from the wisdom to establish boundaries even in the darkest hours.